Hey, hi, how you doing? This is the Gamertron and welcome back to the Gamertron Show. And I'm excited today to talk to you about a very important topic when it comes to action video games, something that is actually overlooked and surprisingly rarely discussed. Because this is an important pillar of what makes a great action video game. And that is the setup and building of a shootout or encounter in an action video game. Now, shootouts / encounters are what you expect them to be, combat scenarios. A section within a level or a part of the game where you battle a certain amount of enemies in an environment. But it is far more complicated than that. I think many critics, gamers, YouTubers, everyone in general just overlooks encounters and shootouts and how they are set up and built. Allow me to explain and provide some examples. While I'm sure you guys have a basic understanding of what I'm talking about, let us just go over the basics and see if you guys can see the bigger picture here. Okay, first, there's entering the encounter area and triggering the encounter. Your starting position, as it were. And once you cross a certain line, hit X marks the spot, or perhaps sound an alarm, it will trigger the enemies in the area and the shootout and encounter will begin. Now, there are a lot of important aspects when beginning an encounter. First off, the environment, where you start off in the environment, where the enemies are placed throughout the environment, where there's perhaps cover, room for flanking, retreating, environmental traps or environmental aids, and their placement and just the placement of everything. Depending on how the environment is built, how it's set up, and where all the props, environmental aids and traps, and enemy spawn points are placed, it's going to determine a lot of things. Do you or your enemy have the advantage? Is there an opportunity for stealth? Is there an opportunity to flank the enemy? Is there an opportunity to take the high ground? Are you out in the open? Are your enemies out in the open? How challenging or how easy is this encounter going to be? You see what I mean? You catching my drift here? Not so simple as it all seemed at first, eh? I know for most players just casually playing the game, you're just going from section to section, moving through the environment, progressing through the level, and encountering enemies as you go along, and just engaging them as they come. But if you take a minute to evaluate your environment, where the enemies come from, you'll notice the dynamics and the possibilities of every encounter and shootout. Now, everyone has a different preference when it comes to engaging in these action scenes. Some players prefer intelligent AI that takes cover and tries to outmaneuver you. Some players prefer dumb AI that just rushes you, combined with just mobs and hordes of enemies, giving you the opportunity to gun them down or cut them down. Some players prefer surprise attacks, not seeing what's coming. Other players like to get a layout of the environment and where enemies are patrolling and placed, and engage the enemies and start the encounter from some other area of the map, depending on how they've evaluated the environment. That point goes doubly so for open world video games. Open world video games have the advantage of having much more wide open areas and providing the player with more choice in how they engage an encounter. Since the areas are so wide open, there are multiple routes and paths to take, and depending on the game, maybe even secret entrances. However, more linear and level-based games have the advantage of having more control over the pacing, timing, and fluidity of encounters. Neither of which are bad, just some players will prefer one style over the other. Then we have very unique games, both open world and not open world, that use procedural generation, this random factor, when it comes to enemy types, enemy placements, and maybe certain things having to do with the environment. This adds a whole new level to encounters, adding more replayability and versatility, and in some ways more options and choices, because if it's procedurally generated, you're almost always guaranteed never the same encounter twice. Something will be different, and that will change the difficulty, the challenge, just everything having to do with that encounter. Now, I've mostly been talking about single-player games, or the single-player aspect of certain games. Let's move on quickly to multiplayer. Now, encounters do happen in multiplayer-based games, but a different type of encounter. When you usually think encounter or shootout, you're thinking a single-player section of a level in a campaign or something like that. However, I think these action encounters can absolutely apply to multiplayer with player encounters and how you encounter and engage a player in a shootout, or in combat in general in any multiplayer game. Now, I think this is obvious to anybody who's played multiplayer, but every player plays differently. Some players like to camp, some players like to move slow, some players like to rush, some players like to do crazy and creative things, and adds sort of a constant freshness to the game. However, level design, map design is a very important aspect when it comes to multiplayer player encounters, because it's going to determine how all your enemies, the other other players interact with the environment, or perhaps how you could coordinate with teammates to engage with other players. I hope you guys are getting an idea of what I'm talking about, because just thinking about all this, encounters, engagements, the setup of an action scene basically, and just how versatile and unique it is to video games and how unique it is to certain types of video games. And I'm sure all of you have that action game with that specific level or that specific part of the game that was more memorable, more fun, and made you want to replay that section over and over again because there was something about that encounter that engaged you, that you found a lot of fun or challenging. And that applies to multiplayer too. Everybody has their favorite multiplayer map, because that map allows for dynamic encounters that you like or that you can take advantage of. I think shootouts and encounters, action scenes in video games, whether created by the player or specifically developed and scripted by the video game developers themselves, I don't think we appreciate them enough. I don't think we appreciate it when it comes to action games, the prep work and setup of a good action encounter and shootout, because there are good and bad encounters and shootouts. You need to have the right amount of enemies. You need to place them in such a way that it's not unfair to the player. Like, they walk into a room and they're immediately gunned down, forcing them to take cover, and just take pot shots from this one piece of cover. The placement of environmental aids and traps is also a big deal, where you put those red explosive barrels, or pitfalls on the floor, where you put weapons, ammo, health. All this stuff, all these items, all these things need to be meticulously placed in order to provide variety, to dictate and provide movement for the player and enemies, and to balance out challenge with enjoyability. It's something we all take for granted, and it's something I request of you. Look back to your favorite games, your favorite action games. Replay your favorite encounters, action scenes, shootouts, melee skirmishes, whatever the encounter may be. Replay it and take a closer look at it. Look where the enemies come from. Look what's placed around the environment. Look at how the environment is constructed to influence you and the enemies. You'll have a deeper appreciation for the development of games and your favorite games with your favorite encounters as a whole. I hope you found this video informative and enjoyable. If you liked the video in any way, shape, or form, please hit the like button. Hitting the like button helps you, helps me, helps everybody involved in the video. If you hit the like button, please leave a comment. What are your thoughts, feelings, and opinions on this topic, and what are some of your favorite encounters from video games? Let me know in the comment section below. I love reading comments. I get nearly enough comments. Please leave a comment. And finally, I am the Gamertron. I love video games. I love talking about video games. So that's something that interests you. Maybe consider supporting my channel by subscribing to me and maybe pledging to me on Patreon. Anyways, that's been a video, and I will see you guys later.